You have to be young to fall in love the way he falls in love with Anne Boleyn. You really have to be young, and you have to be kind of, you know, inexperienced or you know, uncontrolled in that area in your life. You know what I mean? There's just something about Anne Boleyn that captures his spirit, captures his loins. He sees a healthy girl. She'll give me a son, which is a great advantage. She's young. She's got a lot of life. And Anne seems to enjoy life. She's intelligent. She can carry a conversation. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, you know, especially if you're a king and most of your marriages are arranged, you want to know that they don't look like horse meat and they can carry a conversation, because you're going to be with them for a while, or they're going to be around. He was married to Catherine of Aragon for a very, very long time. His relationship with Catherine was wonderful. You know, he loved her deeply and they had a deep respect. But she got old, and she didn't give him a son. And things had to change, and he's a young man. And so it kind of played out its natural course. It would have been even more extraordinary if Henry had remained faithful to Catherine of Aragon. That probably would have made him even sort of more famous. Because the nature of relationships for people of this stature, who you fall in love with is a matter of state. It's politics, and who you marry is a matter of state. And it's very, very hard to be a human in that context. And what we're looking at, I hope, because I haven't seen anything of the production so far, and I won't see anything before anybody sees this, is that I hope people will get what I hope we're getting is somebody who's not allowed to have emotions having emotions, and how they upset it's the world around him, which he wields so much power in. You know, he did some great things, but he did them subconsciously and unbeknownst to himself, and they wouldn't actually appear as great as they were till later on in history. But you know, he took the control. He became the spiritual leader for his country. So he took his kingdom away from Rome, which probably was no harm at the time. You know, Rome was not a very loving, giving, religious, spiritual place to do business, even spiritual business. It was very, very corrupt. And the reason he did it, of course, are for essentially selfish reasons, carnal reasons, that he really wanted Anne Boleyn and he wanted a son. But in fact, he probably saved England a lot of grief later on. I don't think the mentality of the English people, the aesthetic that was growing at that time, would have suited Rome anyway. And I think Henry just pulled it away quicker than anybody thought it would have. But even in that's another thing that he did, and was very, very important for him, was creating an aesthetic for his country. He you know, England was always at war, and you know, so you had the Saxons and you had the Normans, and then you had kings dying and kings living and crusades, and in all that sort of, you know, social, political, military unrest, it hadn't really gained an aesthetic. Henry gave it an aesthetic. He sort of, you know, he gave England an identification that, you know, that it had been lacking up until then. And then, of course, there's the subject of the son. And, you know, Henry desperately wanted to continue his line, as all great men do, especially great royal men. He had to continue his house. And he felt, and he was dead right, he felt that a daughter would not be able to hold it. And they tried to take it away from Elizabeth so many times. But in having Elizabeth, he had the greatest son a man could want. It was just a woman. So his wish was granted. it was granted to Anne Boleyn's child, not to Catherine of Aragon's. When I first got asked to do Henry, of course you immediately say, well, you know, I don't look like Henry VIII. So is that a problem, first of all? Because you've got to think about not only bringing the piece to life, but bringing peace to life in a way that that audiences will embrace. But not only audiences, but also critics, which is the biggest problem. Because, you know, they're just going to say, first of all, he doesn't look anything like Henry. People saw him as this big, robust giant, leg of lamb eating, beer drinking guy. But Henry was a fine looking man when he was young. He did not look like me even then, you know. He was a bigger guy. He had long blonde hair. You know, he cut quite a figure for the time, but we wanted to bring that type of image, and they wanted to work with me in particular. So I think that if they wanted to accurately cast it, they could have casted a 6-foot guy with blonde hair, and he would have kind of looked like what Henry did. But I kind of, in the minds of the people that were producing the piece, and Michael Hurst, who wrote the piece, and Charles McDougall, who directed the first 2 episodes, they kind of they saw something in me that they liked for their Henry. They wanted the fresh, youthful impetuousness to this Henry that makes him do the things that he does. I could create something that was quite different to anything that had been seen before, barring the physical, you know. My Henry is not Keith Mitchell's or Richard Burton's or Ray Winston's. It's mine. You had to be a court. It was where everything happened. Courts were moving, traveling cities. You know, if you weren't in court, you just didn't exist. You were a peasant. You lived in the countryside. You know, you can see all these dukes and all these earls, and they're all at court, and they all had apartments within the court, or used to rent little townhouses around the palace. They had beautiful estates, some of them matching Henry's, out in the countryside, but never got there. Because if you were out at your estate, you were either banished, ill, or nobody wanted to see you. Or you were out of favour with the king, which is the worst thing to be. So everything revolved around the king. So, was Henry like a rock star? Of course he was like a rock star. We throw sort of like rock stars, movie stars up there, and we treat them like gods in the same way as, Henry was treated. Wherever they are, that's where the party is. I think Moore knew Henry when he was very, very young, when he was a young boy, possibly tutored him, maybe. I'm not so sure if he did or not. But Henry would have looked up to Moore as a kind of an older brother figure that he didn't have. He was a man who was learned. His piety was never in question. His own sense of morals were correct. His own sense of propriety was there. And Henry admired him. He admired Moore. Moore was all the good in the world, in many ways. But be careful in thinking that's all Moore is, because Moore's got his own demons. Any man who finds he has to exist in that depth of piety is frightened of something, or is fighting something. Whereas Wolsey is totally different. Without scruples. Wolsey is corrupt, so Henry doesn't have to be. Wolsey gets great wealth. He builds Oxford. His great swan song is building Oxford, and it's quite a swan song. He was incredibly wealthy. He had a lot of power. He had a mistress. I think he fathered 2 children. Now, I might be incorrect, but I think he did. And he made a mistake. He made a mistake, and his mistake was not getting Henry the divorce, but promising Henry something that he couldn't give to him. Henry had no choice but get rid of Wolsey. Wolsey backed himself into a corner, which he couldn't get out of. And when Henry was not granted the divorce by Rome, Wolsey failed him where he had promised him. But extraordinarily enough, very close to Wolsey's death, Henry met him, and he was at a banquet, and Henry walked him over to the window, and the last time they were seen together, they were seen laughing and joking with each other like old friends. So they had that element. He's very close to Wolsey as well, very close, and admires him. He doesn't refer to him in the same blackguard manner, I suppose, as, Richard Burton and Anthony Quayle, their relationship. Myself and Sam's is totally different. Richard Burton had this thing of, he was always calling him Vicar of Hell and illuminating his corruption, whereas I play it differently and illuminate his piety whilst knowing he's corrupt. Henry's no fool. He knows what Wolsey does is not kosher. You don't cross the king, because even if he doesn't want to punish you, he has to, because you made him look a fool. And a king cannot look a fool. I think it was Henry had a fool, a jester, or a groom that used to lie across his doorway, like those snakes, so the wind doesn't come in. And Henry was in bed one night, and he's in his room and he's on his own, and he's trying to figure something out, and he can't get it. And the jester turns to him and says, which, my lord, would you rather be, the king of fools or the fool of kings? And Henry realizes that even if you really love somebody, including his sister, and they try to hurt you, you have to cut their heads off. They have to be gone. They have to be banished, even if it breaks your heart to do it. Even when he executes More, or executes Anne Boleyn, or Catherine being thrown in the Tower, or Buckingham, although he secretly enjoyed Buckingham. But, sometimes you have to kill the thing you love for your own survival. And that's another very, very hard thing that people in these days, we don't really realize that, imagine, growing up. I suppose there's some that do. Someone like, Prince William or Prince Harry. You know what I mean? It's like, I always read stories about Harry in the newspaper. He's getting drunk, he's kissing girls, he's falling out of nightclubs at 5 o'clock in the morning. Well, so he's doing the same thing as every 22 or 23-year-old kid out there is doing. Unfortunately, though, he can't, because he's not a normal human being. He's a demigod, because he's a royal. But in this day, well, you can imagine what it was like 500 years ago. You are a god. If you told peasants in the field that you walked on water, they believe you. So, that's a lot of power to have, but it does restrict you. It's kind of like, it's like putting all this energy in a little ball. And sometimes that ball is going to bounce very hard against something, you know what I mean? And he does. He bounces hard against Anne Boleyn. It's difficult playing Henry. I won't say that it isn't. It can be. It's tiring sometimes. You know what I mean? Because, and it's the same with every job that you do. Any moment could end up on screen. So, and you always have to approach it as if it's like the first scene you've ever done. Do you know what I mean? So it's recreating that freshness. Even when everyone's there, like at 8 o'clock in the evening, and it's kind of like, I just want a sandwich and go home. But you're on camera. It's different. All your flaws can be seen. So that can be a little bit hard, because I like to give as much energy as I can to every production that I do. So, and because there's so much in it, sometimes that's where the fight really comes in, to give, to make it seem fresh, even at 5 to 8 in the evening, because there's one more take and we still haven't got it, and we got to pull it out. But the crew are fantastic. I've worked with a couple of these lads before. The Canadian guys are amazing. The Irish guys are absolutely fantastic. Really good friends that I've made. And everybody on the production team they're like fantastic, because it's very, very rare that you get. It's not only one crew, it's basically two crews that work together so well, you know what I mean? And doing a lot of stuff. I mean, it's like, you could say we're making 3 movies, 3-hour movies, and that's an awful lot of work, you know what I mean? Natalie is extraordinary. Natalie is, like such a technician as an actress. Natalie trained. And Natalie is really, I suppose, the epitome with people that I've worked with, where training meets talent in the best way possible. She's very, very naturally gifted and comes so alive on camera. It's just unbelievable, and is so jarringly beautiful. And she's also incredibly gifted, but also knows the techniques to be able to use those gifts. Which not many actresses do. I mean, I wouldn't be able to do what Natalie does, because I never trained. And it's that fantastic mixture. I mean, it just really, really worked on her. And her Anne Boleyn is extraordinary. It's extraordinary. It's more serious and sensitive than Geneviève Buchon's, which was very playful and then very harsh. But she has all of these things in as well. Anne's very, very playful. There's a beautiful scene where she's dancing, and you can really see Natalie, the actress, enjoying doing the dancing scene, and therefore Anne Boleyn was enjoying dancing. And it was just extraordinary. Her whole character was embodied in that, because while she's dancing, I'm looking at her, my wife's looking at me, Thomas Boleyn's looking at me, looking at her, looking at my wife, looking at me. Wolsey's on the top, looking at us all. I mean, it's kind of, it's daggers at dawn always. There's never a boring day in the kingdom, because it's like if everyone's frightened of their position, one wrong move, it's like you say the wrong thing to Henry and your whole family is wiped out. I mean, that's an awfully tense place to be. No wonder people didn't live very long or took to the drink.